Hi, welcome back to this channel and to this video. I wanted to continue on the conversation because a lot of people actually liked the video I did about working for others and, you know, the issues that you can have, and I wanted to expand on it, give you some insights into how I have gone round a vicious cycle over and over again throughout my life, okay, where I've kind of got to a point. So I've been self-employed for 4 decades, right? And during all of that time, you do hit periods of sort of phases of that period where, you start worrying about money, you start worrying about where the next job's going to come from, you start worrying about paying the mortgage or, the rent or whatever, and buying food and such like. And all of those things are all part of the journey, okay? They're uncomfortable periods of time. But for me, what's actually happened is those tend to be the triggers that I then start thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great to go out and have full-time work? There is a benefit to having full-time work and going and working for someone else. You don't have to keep worrying about taxes, you get regular income, but you have to really, really weigh up what you're losing by working for someone else, okay? And it doesn't really matter even if you're not self-employed. It doesn't matter whether you are, a type of person where you're a career person and you go working for, big corporations, small businesses, whatever. There are kind of warning signs that things are getting on top of you, that things are not quite what they seem. So there's actually a really, really good meme which kind of sums up what it's like working for another corporation, just as a start. It starts off with the tail of a horse, okay, and that's the job, the advertisement of the job. And then you get to the interview and you kind of see a much clearer picture and it looks exciting, etc., etc. And then you get obviously the job offer and you start the job, and you then go through possibly the first 2 to 3 months of starting with a job where I know for me, from my experience, that's when things, you just think, hang on a minute, this picture of this amazing horse that represents a job is beginning to look very sketchy. So it starts to break up a bit, and you go through the induction and you learn about the company, the business, the colleagues, the managers, etc. And you then start to get the red flags, okay? So the red flags tend to be things like what was said on the interview doesn't really add up to what the real job is about. You then start, you then begin to learn about the team that you're with. Now, in jobs that I've been at, fortunately, most of the time, team members or colleagues that you work with tend to actually be really good. I mean, it's usually not them that cause the problems. You then start finding out about the management, and that for me is another big red flag, because very often it's the same management that interviewed you, were nice as pie and have all these amazing ideas and where they can use your skill set, etc., etc. And you then start to begin to see that that's not actually really, that is a red flag, okay? When the managers or the people that actually interviewed you, you start observing and listening to their language and how they treat other people and how they're treating you, it's usually a really big red flag that there's something wrong. Now, I've had this the last 3 places that I've gone to work. Some I've been part-time and some have been full-time. My last one was actually full-time, and the red flag started pretty much straight away. It was actually 2 months into the job. Amazing place to work. I mean, world-renowned kind of company, or establishment, let's say. but things really started falling apart for me within 2 months. Between the third and the 6th month, I knew that actually the job advertised, the interview, the inductions, the tests that I had to take had nothing to do really with the job at all. Probably only 10% of that actually really. And so that drawing of the horse ends up being a very, very basic line outline of a crude drawing of a horse, okay? And that's what tends to happen. It's red flags like that start to indicate that actually it's not quite what it seems. And it's at that point I knew I had to leave, okay? Now, I was kind of in a situation where I really, really liked working with a team. I really liked the job itself. You know, it was good. The only thing I didn't like was the fact that, you know, you're tied to a desk, or you're tied to doing a job that you have to do for 7.5, 8 hours per day. You know, you're getting up quite early in the morning. You don't realize actually how much time you're losing, how much freedom you're actually losing. Another red flag, okay, when you're working for someone else, when you start thinking, you know what, I'm losing my time here. Like, I just don't have any freedom. I'm going home exhausted, mentally exhausted. Big red flag. There's jobs where you feel physically exhausted, and that was never a problem for me. I had no problem doing the work, working late sometimes if that's actually what was required. Another big red flag, right, is your manager doesn't give a shit. Okay, you're working extra time, you're coming in early, you're cutting your lunch breaks because you want to catch up with work or whatever. You know, all of those things. If your manager is not actually, or your line manager is not actually feeding back their appreciation or the business's appreciation of your work over a period of time, that also starts playing on you mentally, you know, psychologically, because you're not appreciated. Okay, you're just literally a number. And when you realize that, again, you know, big red flag, you've got to get out of there, because, you know, all of these things then start having an impact. The lack of freedom, you know, your manager not appreciating what you do, the time and effort that you put in. I was told things like that, you know, my time management was bad, that my attention to detail was bad. All of these things just didn't sit right with me. And I just kept thinking, you know, like, I'm being told things allegedly about myself which I know are untrue. Another big red flag. When people start complaining about things that they say that you're doing or not doing, you've got to take that as a warning sign. It's another big red flag, okay? You're being treated the same as everyone else. So if you're working in a team where you're working your guts out, you're being enthusiastic and conscientious about everything, you know, you're kind of ticking all those boxes about being a good employee, but you've got people in your department that literally just do the bare minimum. Okay, so they're there 10 seconds before they're supposed to start, and they are leaving 1 second after they finish. And in amongst that time, you know that they're not meeting their targets. You know that they're not doing as much work as you are. Another big red flag. Okay, because you'll probably find that they're being paid more money than you, or the same amount of money than you, and you're busting your backside off to do a job, and they're doing the bare minimum. Okay, that's another big red flag. That you have to make a decision about whether you really want to live in that kind of environment. And I know from experience myself, and I know with other people, that is another big sign, and it gets you depressed, because you think, hang on a minute, Like, I'm really busting a gut here to do things, and somebody else who's at the same grade as you is just doing the bare minimum. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. All of these kind of red flags start to mount up, and they're just not, this just not conducive to being in an environment where you're going to be happy. You have to listen to these things about your job. If you don't listen to them, what happens is you start getting stressed. You start making yourself ill because psychologically your subconscious is telling you, this is not right, I'm not happy, this doesn't sit right with me. I'm being, forced to do things. But my last job, I was being forced to take a 1 hour lunch break. I don't like taking 1 hour lunch breaks. I mean, I haven't done that for most of my life. It was just bizarre. There was just all sorts of things. Okay, I'm going to finish this video off with one more red flag, which is an absolute, like, the nail in the coffin for me. Usually if I look back on most of the jobs I've had, this was the bit that decided it for me, that I just couldn't live like that. I just can't work in that kind of environment anymore. And that is micromanagement. Now, micromanagement is where your line manager or managers literally monitor everything you're doing. They are criticizing and monitoring everything you do. They tell you to do things, and then you find out, you do them. Okay, so this is normally the way it works. They start saying they have concerns about something all of a sudden, right? Performance levels, the way you're talking to other people, I don't know, a decision that you made on something that they didn't really agree with, and you think, well, hang on a minute, that was like 8 months ago. And that's another, that's just kind of another red flag. But micromanagement is definitely something where people, very often in my opinion, they feel like they haven't got control of you. So they think that you're doing a too good a job, or that you're making other people look bad, possibly their friends or their mates, which again is not a very good thing if you've got managers who have got mates in the team. They start then complaining and feeding back information. You then start becoming a really, everything is like hyper focused on your job, your role, and what you're doing. So micromanagement is a really big red flag that, things are not gonna, because it's not going to work out at the end of the day, because that it never goes away. You can do everything that these people ask you to do, it's never good enough. They will always find criticism, because usually it's because they're jealous. They don't like the fact that you're doing things that they can't, or that their mates are not able to do, because they're underperforming or they're doing the absolute bare minimum. They don't like the fact that you come in and all of a sudden you're doing 3 times more work. What else can I say about that? I mean, that for me is usually the nail in the coffin with regard to the job. Once micromanagement comes in, and if you get it from several people as well, and you then find that your line manager is feeding incorrect information all the way up the chain, you're not going to win. You're absolutely not going to win. It never goes away, right? It never ever goes away. In my experience, it never goes away, and that's always been. At that point is when I then say, okay, I've had enough. I've had enough, and I've had that several times in my career. Now, I may produce another video, and I am going to be producing another video about narcissism, sociopathic, psychopathic tendencies, and Machiavellianism. Because that in itself is also another really big red flag if you start to experience those kind of people in your team or in the management structure. There are ways of noticing, being aware of that these people are like that, because they've always got the same traits. There are ways that you can manage it. At the end of the day, you either have to put up with it or get out. It's as simple as that, really. Again, tends to be another red flag, because very often at the interview stage and that kind of honeymoon period when you first start in a job, that 2 to 3 months, possibly up to 6 months, they're very good at masking. Okay, they're very, very good at masking the kind of person or the type of person they are, and then you begin to start noticing cracks, if you like, in their personality, where they will say certain things, they will do certain things, they will behave a certain way, which then just fits that pattern of typically narcissistic kind of people, control freak type people. Again, that's another red flag for me, because you're just never going to win. You'll never ever win, and depending on the organization you're at, if it's a very old organization, where things don't really change too much, you're never going to win. Doesn't matter what you do, you're never going to win against these people. And very often that also turns into a form of micromanagement, where they use that as a means of control. It's almost like you can hold it off for a while, because you're maybe quite popular and people like the fact that you're hitting your targets, and your personality fits in with other people within the company. I mean, it all depends on your job. But when you're being managed by somebody who's a narcissist, again, you're never really going to get anywhere, and it's a case of either you put up with it or you get out. And for me, it's always a get out situation, because I don't like that kind of environment. I just can't work in that environment. Anyway, I hope this has been useful. Maybe you can relate to it. I mean, if you do relate to it, or you want to ask more questions about my life experiences, coming across these kind of people, and what you do afterwards, of course the big thing is, it's very easy to say, oh well, you just got to get out and look for another job. If looking for another job for you is usually not an option, then that's your answer, really. I have actually had to literally walk out of jobs before, because it usually gets so bad. But anyway, thank you very much for watching if you've got this far, and I look forward to seeing you in another video soon.